Good morning. Continuing along, Ayin Beis, the summary review. We are on page in volume 3, middle of page 1468. Finish the first paragraph there. Let me review what we've learned so far. So the last section that we learned was the contrast between Yesh Miyesh and Yesh Ma'ayin. That there are two key differences. One is that when Yesh Ma'ayin, creation compared to the creator, is infinitely distant. There's nothing in common among them about them. One is infinite and beyond, and one is finite, and there's no effect, there's no impact. Creation does not impact the source, whereas in Yesh Miyesh it does. So he explained this with an example, the example of sunlight and the example of the light and energy of the soul. That when the sun gives off light, it doesn't have any impact on the sun, whether it's radiating or not radiating. And the same thing, the nefesh is not impacted. So even if there's a particular faculty that is lacking, like he gave the example of a blind person can give birth to a seeing child. Why? Because the nefesh is not lacking, not affected by what it transmits. It remains intact. It's only ha'ara. And the same thing is lamaila, meaning that existence is all created from the oir, and therefore the oir does not make any difference, does not affect the moir, the source of the light. Okay. In the parentheses, he explained the more nuanced details of this, that the light does carry the divine essence's power to create, but it does so in a way that doesn't impact because it's only a ha'ara, it's only a reflection. So it doesn't have any power of its own. Its entire power comes from Atzmus, which Mitziusim Atzmusei. He's the only reality, the true reality that can create. And that's why Oir, which is just a reflection of that source, carries that power. But the actual Savas is happening through Oir, so it doesn't affect the source. Then he added that in truth, the Oir is also not affected. The light that shines also is not impacted by the creation. That's why we say Ani Havaya Leshan, you see. Havaya is already a gili, Havaya is a name. And even the last hay of Havaya, Malchus, is not affected. Why? Because the aura does not come down in a manifest way. And even that which comes Kayach Hapel Benifel in a manifest way, that's so-called the power of the producer enters within the product. He said that's only ha'ara, and there too there's no shini mitzad etzem. The shini would only be mitzad slapshus, because in fact at that moment it's engaging with existence. So that's all that he explained, learned yesterday's class. I'll continue now, the new paragraph on page 1468. We're now going to go into further analysis of this. So remember, there's two, the mashal of the sun, and there's the second mashal, the example of the nefesh giving off energy. So till now we've been saying the nefesh, as it manifests within the body, as it gives its energy, doesn't affect the nefesh. But now he's going to bring that there's actually two levels in the nefesh. There's a level that it does affect, and there's a level that's beyond. Similar to what he just said, that the divine energy that is removed and is aloof and is not affected by creation, but there's a divine energy that does manifest and does relate to creation. And now he's going to explain that. Va'inyanhu, and the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com, the new paragraph on page 1468. And here's what he says. Va'inyanhu de'inyan b'nefesh ha'adam. We talk about the soul of a person, the spirit, the human spirit, which is basically the force that gives life and sustains a human being, a body. He mispa'elis memikri aguf. We said before it's not affected, but the fact is we know that this nefesh does get impacted from the affairs of the body, things that happen to the body. If any particular organ or limb or is damaged or injured, targish hanefesh asakaev. The nefesh will also feel the pain. It's not just a physical pain. The spirit, the soul also feels it. The yitzar lenefesh.
and there'll be pain. The nefesh will feel a certain anguish, a certain agony, a certain pain. Hagam shemushlelsi mekol teyad hageshem, even though the spirit is completely beyond any type of physical parameters. The soul doesn't change from the way it was before it entered the body. The very same soul enters into the body. It didn't change. So on one hand, the soul is an ethereal, so-called spiritual entity. Nevertheless, it's impacted and affected by the affairs of the body, which seem to contradict what we said before. We said for example, if he said on the top page, if anything is missing in Avriya Guf, for example, if you have your eyes closed and you're not seeing, practically it doesn't have any effect on your soul's ability to see, that faculty to see. And yet here he's saying that the experiences of the body do affect the soul. So how do we understand all that? That's what he's going to be discussing now. And we must say that both are true. Both the fact that it doesn't have impact and it does have impact. He's going to explain. The kasher yarda nefesh v'nislapsha b'dam u'basar. Once the nefesh descended and manifest within the blood and the flesh of the human being, hari b'dam atzmei hu islapsha sa nefesh haruchni. It's not in a detached way. When it comes to sunlight, the sunlight, even as it's shining and illuminating us on earth, and it's warming us, it doesn't become part of us. The nefesh, on the other hand, becomes dam hua nefesh, we say. The very blood is the blood of life. That means, for example, the blood, God forbid, of a person who's a corpse. There's blood there too, but the blood is no longer carrying any life. But when the nefesh manifests within the body, within the flesh and blood, it manifests in a way, so yes, the blood, even though the blood is a physical liquid, but it's called the liquid of life. It has a certain element of a life force that flows through it. So it's not just the soul is giving off like the sun energy and it gives life to the body. It actually manifests within the blood of the very human being. And he's going to explain this in detail. You may recall when we learned it the first time, a very fascinating piece here about how Gashmis and Ruchnis come together, because that itself is quite a interesting experience. How does spirit and matter come together in the body? So see, right now, I'm speaking to you right now, I'm alive, you're alive. Is it your nefesh or is it your guf? And you see, it's like they come together as one. Again, the sun doesn't do that. The sun gives light to the earth. It illuminates, it's bright, it warms the earth. But it doesn't manifest within any physical entity. You could say that physical entity is like a keli for the sun or for sunlight. Whereas the nefesh does manifest. So, and he's going to explain this. The pasuk says, "Do not eat the nefesh, the spirit, with the flesh, with the meat." Adam nefesh. What does that mean? It means not to eat blood. That's the issue. Why are you not allowed to eat blood? Because Adam hua nefesh. Because blood is not just another limb or organ of the animal. It itself carries a nefesh, and it says, "Do not eat that." The nikla is ruchni shebegashmis. The dam is called the ruchni shebegashmis. So the veins themselves, or the arteries, or think of the physical body itself, that's gashmis, shebegashmis. That's a physical entity. But the blood is gashmi. It's a physical liquid. You could touch it. You could see it. And yet it has some type of spirit within it, some ethereal element to it. So he calls that ruchni shebegashmis. This piece is from the Mittler Rebbe, directly from the Maimer of the Mittler Rebbe. Ruchni shebegashmis. Hainu ruchni sanefesh shebedam. Calling the ethereal spirit that exists within the blood. So the blood is a particular keli for that.
For example, God forbid, if somebody wanted to replace blood with another liquid, let's say water, water would not carry the life. It has to be blood. Blood has properties that allows it to carry the life force, everything that comes with the life force that causes a person to be alive. You can't replace it with another liquid. So dam has a particular personality that allows it to carry the ruchnius hanefesh within it. That's the dam, the nefesh shebedam. She'en leze erech afilu lahagashmi sheberuchni. Now, on the other hand, the soul is a ruchni. The soul itself is a spiritual entity. But just like the physical has two dimensions, the physical of the physical and the spirit of the physical, which is blood, the nefesh also has two components. The ruchni sheberuchni, that's the pure ethereal nefesh as it's removed from the body. But then, when the soul has to come into the body, it also prepares itself to become something that can enter into the blood. So two things are happening. The blood has to be conducive to receive the nefesh, and the nefesh has to be conducive to enter into the blood. They have to have something commensurate. And yet he's saying, even though that's the case, there's still a big distance between not just the gashmi shebegashmi, but even the ruchni shebegashmi, even the ethereal part of blood, which carries the spirit. He says it's not comparable to the gashmi sheberuchni, to the so-called more material part of the spirit of the nefesh. Which is referring to the very core of the nefesh, but as it is before it comes into the body. But there is a gashmi sheberuchni because the nefesh has to be ready to enter into the body, into the blood. I just to give a little example for this, when you light, let's say, a flame, you need to have a wick, and the wick has to be a very particular wick. You can't, for example, use a wire for a wick because it doesn't absorb oil and it won't burn. You can't use other materials either. It needs to be something, a piece of cloth, cotton. That's a wick. So you see, the wick itself has to be conducive, has to be primed to be able to receive a flame. Same thing with a flame. If you take a very big torch and try to light a small little wick, it's going to burn it out. It's not going to mass. The flame has to also somewhat descend from its so-called pure fireplace, fiery source, so to speak, and be able to relate to the wick. It's like a teacher and a student. The teacher has to come closer to the student, and the student has to come closer to the teacher. So that's how Hashem made that the damu hanefesh, that in the physical body there's blood, and blood is more subtle and more sublime than other parts of the body that carries the fluid of life. And the life force is coming into a way that can manifest within that blood. So we've been talking about ruchnis and gashmis as being very distant from one another. Here, with the nefesh, there is a part of the blood, there's a part of the nefesh that enters into the blood, and that's the blood is called the gashmi sheberuchni. And it's still quite a distance, quite, like he says, you can't compare it to the very spirit itself. Because the blood, at the end of the day, though it carries the spirit, but it is tangible. And it's something you can do a blood transfusion. Blood is a tangible physical entity. The af mashi yesh bo koyach is gals vispashus lahachis kol geshem shenikra gashmi sheberuchnius. So even though the soul now does have the power to reveal itself and to extend itself, express itself, to give life, to sustain and energize the physical, and that's why it's called Gashmi Sheberuchnis, because the soul, the way it is in heaven, is completely removed from the body altogether. Here, the soul has been primed. Like you see, the 9 months of pregnancy, the soul and the body are getting to know each other, and they become they become connected. So the Gashmis of the Ruchnis of the Nefesh is relating to the Ruchnis of the Gashmis of the blood. So even though it comes Gashmis sheberuchnis, l'maylo hu harbe mebchinas haruchnis shebegashmis. So the word "hu" seems to be an incorrect word. It should say "gavoya." Lamaylo gavoya harbe b'chinas haruchnis shebegashes. Raf mashir b'koyach is gals v'spassus nachis kol gemshni v'gash m'shabrov lamaylo gavoya harbe. So nevertheless, even though the nefesh has come down to a level where it can relate to Gashmis, it's still higher than the ruchnis of the Gashmis of the Dam, the subtle part, the sublime ethereal part of the Gashmis, which is the blood. The Hainu, HaNefesh HaMishlabeshes, Umurkeves Bedam. The nefesh that manifests within and gets enclosed, and Murkeves, and gets mixed together with the blood itself. The Ima Yes, so even though the Shneim Hemrak Ha'oris Nefesh, even though both of them are only a reflection of the nefesh, not the very core of the soul, because even the soul itself is giving off light, like we've said before. The hilahachis, and the general light, and this general reflection is in order to give off life. V'hainu koyach ha'izgalus, which is the power of the soul to express itself. Because the soul could also be in a state where it's just in its own, it's not giving off life. We're talking about the soul as it's manifesting in a way to enliven and energize and sustain the body. Makom mokim, mashababi his galus mamish. What actually comes in a revealed way from the soul, who madrega tachtena shebaharazu, is the lower level of this reflection. And it comes in some type of separate way from the core ruchnius of the nefesh. So in other words, the nefesh is a spiritual ethereal entity. It was created in a way that it should be able to come down into this world, into a physical body, and give life. That's a reflection, just like the reflection of the sun. It's not the sun itself. Here too, it's not the etzem nefesh. That part that is the reflection from that lower level of the reflection comes that energy that manifests in the blood. So you have the gashmis of the ruchnius, which means the lower level of the sublime manifests in the higher level of the material, and that's where they meet. Nefesh meets the blood, which gives life to the body, which is the gashmis shebegashmis. So as I said, most of this is a piece from the Mittler Rebbe, but it's coming to explain how it works. So what you see from here is that when it comes to the soul, there's nefesh, the spirit of the person, it does manifest within the person, and he's going to explain based on this why the soul is affected by the affairs of the body. But we'll get to that shortly. V'agam shalei nishtana. And though the soul did not change, when it comes into the body, it did not change from the way it was on its own. It remains a level of oir, of energy and vitality. In other words, it hasn't become a physical entity, the soul. It's manifest in the physical, but it hasn't become physical. Nevertheless, being the lowest level within the spirit, meaning the most tangible part, relatively speaking, in the spiritual part of the soul, like we say, gasus haruach. It's an expression when you say about an arrogant person. So they say ruach is spirit. Gasus ruach means a thick spirit. So he has spirit, he's got energy, but it's an arrogant one. It's crass, it's coarse. So he's showing that there is the possibility to have something there is a spirit there, but it's a very coarse spirit, which in this case would be arrogance. So, so therefore, you say it comes like in a type of removed way. Though it's still the soul, but it's removed from the way the soul is in its pure, pristine state before it manifests within the body. Hadam, Now, this part of the soul has more connection to the dam, to the physical blood, than it does to the spirit and the ethereal part of the nefesh. Because the nefesh on its own is a pure spirit. The nefesh without a body, the soul without a body, is a spiritual entity that's pursuing spiritual interests. But when it comes into the blood, now the nefesh is not removed, it's still spiritual, but it's focused and it's manifest. It relates now to giving life, and that's why Hadam HaNefesh has gone into the blood and is giving life, sustaining and energizing the human being. Valkein Boba Hakshama, and that's why this energy comes now in a more tangible, more congealed and solidified way, Bislapshuse Be'evri Haguf, as it manifests within the limbs and the organs of the body, as was explained earlier. So all of this at lengthy discussion is really coming to dissect and show us how when it comes to nefesh, unlike the sun, but the sun remains an makif, remains an that does not manifest in any hislapshus way in the physical existence. And that's why, of course, it's not impacted. The nefesh, so though there's a level of the nefesh that's also not impacted, but there's a level of nefesh that does engage and becomes the nefesh, the spirit, the biological spirit within the energy within the body, and that's the dam. There's no question, it's dam. God did not make it in a way that a soul enters your body and just energizes you. The soul manifests within the blood, and the blood is now a unique type of fluid, the fluid of life, damu nefesh. Now, the elaboration of all of this is because he wants to explain how, despite the fact that we've been speaking till now that Ani Hashem Leishanisi, that there's no change, there's no ispilas, there's no effect on the higher levels of the divine. But remember, Koyach HaPoel Benifel, there's also the element of the divine that does manifest in existence. And then there is effect. Not on the etzem, like he said, on etzem, but beside the slapshus. Like I explained with the teacher. The teacher's core is not affected by teaching. But what he's teaching to students, he's very much affected in the engagement that he's in the discourse and engagement that he's having with his student or students. Now he's going to continue to explain this concept. So let me go off a little more, and then I'm going to come back to the point of that he made initially, that the nefesh is affected by the pain and the affairs of the body. So he says now like this. Valkein, mitzad ruchnius begashmis aguf. This ruchnius, which means this ethereal energy, that's in gashmis aguf, which he called ruchnius, which he called gashmi, the ruchnius shebegashmis, which is what blood essentially is. Shenivdelis kfar mina atzmis haruchni, the nefesh, that has in some way separated from the pure core spirit and ethereal nature of the nefesh, being that now the nefesh has now become a composite of the four elements, the physical elements that are part of the blood and in general the body. So the blood is made up of eish, ruach, mayim, ofer. So because of that, now we understand why that's why the nefesh will be affected by the affairs, mikres, like affairs or activities or events that take place in the body, bitzar v'enig, both pain and pleasure. So when a person feels pain and pleasure, it's not just a physical sensation. The nefesh itself also feels pain, pleasure and pain. Or he says the order is tsar v'enig, pain and pleasure. Why? The sun doesn't feel our pain or pleasure, even though it's shining on us and warming us, and it's necessary for our existence, because the sun never manifests within the body. The nefesh, the higher levels of the nefesh, will soon learn, are not affected. But there's a part of the nefesh that became now blood. And the blood is carrying the dam hu ha-nefesh. That's what the pasuk calls it. The blood is the nefesh. It doesn't even say the blood carries the nefesh. It is the nefesh. That's why you're not allowed to eat it, as he mentioned before. So you see here that the nefesh has an element where it manifests in a pnimistic way. And as a result of that, it's not where it's moved. It's a step away from the very core essence of the nefesh. That is removed from the physical. But the part of the nefesh that's manifest within blood, which is called the gashmi of the ruchni of the nefesh, which manifests within the ruchni of the gashmi of the dam, there it is affected by the mikre haguf, by the pain and joy of what's happening in the body. So yes, God could have made that we have a soul that's just like the sun, completely detached and removed. It gives life, but like the sun, from a distance. The light comes to earth, so it's not from a distance, but the light never enters in any internalized way, in a slapshizdik way into existence. That's why the light is not affected, like we said earlier, by where it's shining and how it's shining. But the nefesh is one extra point. The nefesh is a pnimi. And then interesting, there's a ha'ara, a note from the Rebbe and a mimer from the Frierdiker Rebbe, Tavshin Ches, where he discusses this idea as well, and he says, Ki ha'nefesh hu pnimi. Here he doesn't say those words in the actual text here, but that changes because shemesh would be a makif for the reasons we're discussing now. Even though it's shining and it's warming and it's affecting the earth, and without the sun we would not exist. But it doesn't have the pneumistic element of islapshus. And the nefesh does, and that's the dam hua nefesh. And that's why it's affected by the tsar v'enig, shetzar haguf, hutzar nefesh. Bodily pain is also, you can call it psychic pain, meaning it also affects the nefesh. It's not just a physical thing, and the nefesh doesn't feel it at all. And the pleasure, even physical pleasure, also becomes the pleasure of the nefesh. So that's why, for example, on Shabbos, when we have the mitzvah of Einik Shabbos, who's supposed to experience Einik? So first of all, God forbid, a dead person doesn't experience pleasure, doesn't eat altogether. But so when you're eating, on one hand, the body is enjoying it. It's clearly a bodily pleasure, because neshamas in heaven don't eat, a neshama that's detached. But it's not just the gashmi is the pleasure. That's part of the mitzvah. They should have eine gashmi. But the eine gashmi is also the spirit. The person feels pleasure. Not just like the body has a pleasure and the spirit is completely removed from that. So it's also the eine hanefesh. And also the opposite way. When the nefesh has pleasure, it also affects the body. Well, the hepech, enig nefesh hazeis, the pleasure of the soul is also enig haguf, hagashmi, atshi yisaden habasar, to the point that the very flesh of the person will enjoy and actually expand. Yisaden is from the word adin, sweet, will have pleasure. Like the Gemara says in Gittin, famous Gemara, when one of the Tanoim had met the son of the emperor, the Roman emperor, and he tells him, and they're speaking that he will be the successor to his father, and then the news came that his father had died and he was becoming the successor. So it says there that they were putting on his shoe, his sandal, and it didn't fit his shoe. His foot didn't fit into the sandal, even though it was his sandal. It was measured to his foot. So it says, because Shmua Teva Tadashan Etzem, a good piece of news that added pleasure to the person. He had a certain pleasure from the fact now he's going to be king, that actually made his body physically swell. That's what he says. Kamoy bepsura Teva Tadashan Etzem. Then for a good piece of news, the actual basar, the etzem, actually the etzem is like the bone, but basically the physical part of the person actually became tadashan, became thicker. It swelled. V'yatzivu ponov, and his face gets illuminated, shines. A physical face. When you hear some good news, you see a person's face lights up. There's like an aura. Medam, from the blood that rushes to the face, machmas simchas hanefesh. So you see here clearly that a person, so there's one way is that physical pleasure also causes spiritual pleasure of the soul. But there's also when the spirit of the person gets uplifted, for whatever reason, it also will have a physical sensation.
both on his flesh, on his body, and now he's speaking like the face. The blood will run to the face, and a person you'll see a glow. Why is that the case? Because the nefesh and the guf are commensurate to each other to some extent. Maybe the word commensurate is not the right word I would use, but means that they both speak to each other. They're engaging with each other. Now, if you recall, this is very similar to what we learned about the nefesh alikis and nefesh habamis. Remember, we learned the nefesh alikis and nefesh habamis can become like mohus echad, literally, where the nefesh alikis, when it contemplates our godliness, it's doing through the garments and the examples and the parallels of the animal soul's understanding. Seichel ativi. So this is obviously consistent with that. Because there we're talking about as it comes down and manifests. Now, obviously, there's a part of the nefesh that remains apart from the body and the animal soul. Just wanted to make that parallel. But bottom line is, there's this connection. And also the other way around. When you hear a bad piece of news, God forbid, ponav roim, the person's face becomes ashen. You can see the face becomes anguished. V'nilke bedam. And the point could be that even the blood rushes away, becomes pale. Achi yichla haguf, to the point that the person can become ill. And you see this as well. In other words, it doesn't remain just a psychic pain on a spiritual level. It actually has an effect on the person, effect on his blood flow. You can say blood pressure. He doesn't use that word, to the point that it can actually cause illness. How's that possible? The nefesh and guf are two different worlds, because the nefesh and the guf, the nefesh, the lower level of the nefesh, the ha'ara, becomes like nivdelis and relates to existence of the physical body, and as such, it's affected both ways. The body affects the spirit on this level, and the spirit affects the body. Shekol zeh, all of this, moira indicates kesher v'chibur, a bond and a connection and a bond and a connection. Haruchni is begashmis, of the spirit, of the ethereal and the material. Mamish, and they become literally like one. Shelo yitaken leimer klal, to the point that you cannot at all say I'm not sure the next word, ke'ela b'nefesh haruchni atzma. Shelo yitaken leimer klal. Ka'ala maybe, b'nefesh, I'm not sure. Shelo tispal klal me'eni v'tzar gufni. You cannot say that the nefesh haruchni atzma, let me just read the whole piece to make sure I have it right. 1 second. Oh no, my mistake. Let's stop. So there's a kesher and chibur, and that's why one affects the other. Now starts another piece, that all this is talking about the nefesh as it manifests within the body. Now he continues and says, but you cannot say this. Like we cannot all, what we just said cannot be said at all. All this that we just said cannot be said at all. But nefesh haruchni atzma, and the nefesh haruchni on its own. It's only as the nefesh manifests within the body. That there it doesn't have any effect, the tsar, from the pleasure and tsar gufni. Badam, eine beginnes haruchni shebegashmi me'enig v'tzar ruchni shebe'etzem ha'nefesh shebilti milubeshes klal beguf. And so too, the nefesh shebebasar v'dam, which means the ruchni shebegashmi. So not only, so when it comes to the nefesh that manifests within the blood, there you could say it has an effect. But the nefesh, etzem ha'nefesh itself, it does not have an effect. And even that, the nefesh, as it manifests within the basar v'dam, which he called before ruchni shebegashmi, not talking about gashmi,
Nefesh shebedbos hainu b'chinas haruchni shebegashmi. Me'enig v'tzar ruchni shem etzem. So can let this ball and nefesh shebos v'dam hainu b'chinas haruchni shebegashmi. Right. That the nefesh shebos v'dam b'chinas haruchni shebegashmi, like the blood, is not affected from the enig v'tzar ruchni shebetzem hanefesh shebilti melubeshes klal beguf. It will not be affected by the pleasure and the pain of the etzem hanefesh, which does not manifest inside the body. So he's saying clearly that there's two levels. There's the level of the spirit that relates to the body, and there it's affected by your bodily emotions, like tsar and einig, pleasure and pain and pleasure. And then there's a level that does not affect. I want to read it again to make sure I got it right, because the language was a little through me, but I'll look at it again in a minute. I'm going to stop here for any questions. Let me just read it again. Let me just see. Yeah, also both directions. The nefesh haruchni atzma, it's not affected by physical pleasure and pain, and also the opposite, the spiritual pleasure and pain of etzma nefesh does not affect the bus of Adam, like we said before about a good piece of news or something that does affect it. That's only on that lower level, right? Okay, I'll stop here if anybody wants to ask anything. So what he's added here, basically, over what we've learned till now, it was both the example of sunlight and the energy of the soul were both examples where there's no shinui nispilus. There's no effect on the soul or on the sun from its light that it gives off. And there's no effect even from the events on the light itself is also not affected. What he qualified now by saying is saying that in the nefesh, there's another level, which is going to be similar to the koyach hapoel benifel. That the nefesh does, there is a level that's not affected. That's correct, like you just said, the etzem nefesh, or the etzem ruchni. But then there's effect when it comes to the ruchni shebegashmis, the blood, the nefesh that relates to giving life and sustenance. There is an effect. Now, this is clearly going to help us understand how it works with the divine energy and existence, but he hasn't gotten to that yet. He's still explaining the mashal of nefesh and guf. And it's clearly different than sunlight. In sunlight, you don't have the second level. There is no level where the sun or its light is affected by the events of that, where it's shining or where it's illuminating. You don't have that concept at all. But now, in the parentheses, and this is all the Mittler Rebbe's language, mind you. So now the parentheses on top of page 1469, where we're up to, he says, Rak leprokim. However, there are at times where there is an impact. There's an expression, there's a poster that says the heart knows the pain, the moras, the bitterness of the soul. And he's clearly saying that this is not, we're not talking about the nefesh, the level of the nefesh that manifests within the body. We're talking about the lev yedea. There's something that a person can sense, the pain or the bitterness. Moras is the pain, the agony of the soul. And also the pleasure, even in the helam and makif of the neshama, that does not relate directly to the body. This is just a quick qualification. He doesn't elaborate. It looks to me this is from the Mittler Rebbe as well. But he wants to disqualify to say that there are at times where a person can sense that the nefesh on its own is either in pain or pleasure. But we're not talking about a pleasure and pain that relates to the human being. It's more of something that is much more sublime. So there are leprakim. Prakim means at times, at certain intervals, at certain situations. I'd have to look up to see if there's other places in Chassidus where that's discussed. And that it doesn't say enough here to really elaborate on it, but that's what he says here. Okay. Now comes two parentheses, one after the other. And this is the Rebbe Rashab explaining the Mittler Rebbe's concept here. And he's going to bring it down, like he says, V'yesh l'karav zeis. That's an expression that Chassidus, not so often, it's a rare expression, in order to bring it closer to us. It means in order to make this a little more palatable. V'yesh l'karav zeis. That's the Rebbe Rashab is doing now. He's taking this idea and says to make it a little closer to us, a little more, as I said, palatable. He says we can learn that from a masha anurayim, from what we see, that kashera adam hu be'eza tirda. When a person is in some way engaged in something, tirda would mean involved, immersed. Tirda is sometimes means worried, but tirda means here he's engaged in something. A tirda, k'may betirda saseichel. Like he's struggling, exertion. He's exerting himself.
Preoccupied?
I think the words I used, I think, were sufficient. If that helps you grow, fine. So, yeah, you could say that too, yeah. So, betirdas hasechel kahai gavna. So a person is engaged and involved and immersed, occupied, fine, in seichel. Kahai gavna is like etc. or something else. In other words, they're not doing it superficially. There is an engagement. You're involved in something. So when you're really immersed in something, it's possible that you shouldn't even feel the pain in any particular part of your body, because you're so distracted by your mind. Like, for example, if you're hungry, if you're really immersed in something, you may not even feel that you're hungry. Here he's not saying hunger, he's saying pain. Now, obviously, there's different levels of pain, but that what you see that. So what do you see from that? What does that tell you? Why you're not feeling it? If the person was not busy and engaged or immersed and exerting himself in, let's say, in a seichelic idea, learning something, trying to understand something, he absolutely would feel the pain. But in a way, he's lifted himself up to another place, so his mind is elsewhere, and it's keeping him busy. He's very taken by it. He's immersed in it. So b'shas the nefesh is higher than slapshus b'gesh maguf. It's not just going through its regular routine. Ein margish kol kachas mikra aguf. He doesn't feel that much the affairs of the body, the experiences of the body. Maybe even better. Mikra could be the experiences of the body. And you see this again in many different scenarios. This is all the Karev he's coming to try to explain, where there's a level where you are feeling, you could, because technically, if there's pain in your body somewhere, it would make sense, unless your nerves, God forbid, are numbed, you should feel all the pain. But here a person can lift themselves up to a place where they're beyond, and as a result are not feeling the regular sensations that the body would feel. You see that clearly. V'chein move on, mizeh, and we also understand from this, she'haispailas hamidas shebelev, ma'aseichel, ma'asogas ha'seichel. Okay, so what's that? The second piece seems to be another additional point. So that's point number one. So you see that there's two levels right there. When you're not busy with anything, you'll be more affected by the experiences of the body. The spirit will be more affected. When a person is busy with something, very occupied, preoccupied, or involved, immersed in something, then they won't feel it quite as much. Kol kach. Doesn't mean they don't feel anything, but kol kach. So now he adds one more thing now. V'chein muva mizeh. We also understand from this, shahispailas hamidas shebelev. We talked earlier about the midas shebelev, the emotions in the heart. They get stimulated. Ma'asogas ha'seichel, from the comprehension of the mind, like we learned earlier, when you comprehend something and you appreciate it, it could in turn give birth and stimulate emotions that you enjoy, you're attracted, you're drawn to it. So this is why Yidei Das Dafke. This bridge between Hasagas HaSeichel and Midas is Dafke through Das. So who Das HaMispashet HaMevi Umamshech Esei Lamata Lispoil Ba'amida. So he doesn't explain it here, but elsewhere, remember in the end of volume 2 and other places, in Tanya actually, Tanya chapter 3, he talks about Das is Iskashus. Das is the carrier of Seichel into Midas, that you really bond yourself. So he says, it's through Das HaMispashet, which draws, HaMevi Umamshech Esei, is drawing the Seichel of Chacham and Bina, Lamata, below, Lispol Ba'amida. So Das is the bridge between Chacham and Bina, between Seichel, understanding something, the Hasaga, and bring it into emotion. You really bond with it. Because, for example, you can understand something academically in an abstract way, and it doesn't affect your emotions, like we learned. It's also possible. But Das is the bridge. Why is that relevant here? V'lula iskasha sh'aidei Das harelo yispol mizeh. And if you didn't have that iskashus, in other words, if you thought about the idea, but you didn't really bond yourself with it. You didn't really feel it's negated to you. Like we talked about Das, the example that the story with the person who couldn't read the letter. Someone else read the letter for him, and the letter had communicated that his father unfortunately passed away. So he fainted, even though he couldn't read the letter, and the person reading the letter didn't faint. So the Rashbats, one of the great Chassidim, said that's an example for Das. That's not just a seichel, it's in the seichel that's negated to you. It's my father. The reader is not his father, so it didn't affect him. So Das is like iskashus. It means it's sensing the idea relates to me, and therefore it connects to an emotion, which means it's good for me, or unfortunately it could be a tsar for me. So Das is that bridge. And if there was no iskashus through Das, he wouldn't be excited in the heart. The heart would not get stimulated. So what do we know from this? Why is he adding this? From this we understand the ispilus hanefesh memikli aguf, that the nefesh being affected from the experiences of the body, hurak beruchnis hanefesh hamislabish ba'adam. It's only with the ruchnis hanefesh that's mislabish, like in the case of Das. When does it affect the seichel, affect the midas? Is dafka when it's mislabish in an internalized way. Loi be'etzem haruchnis shel hanefesh, not in the very core spirit of the nefesh. So what he's saying is 2 points in this parentheses. First point is that we see when a person is really engaged in something, they're not going to feel because they've removed themselves from that level of the nefesh that relates to the body to some extent. The second point he makes, that relationship is like Das. Das creates the connection. However, if you are focused on something else, then you're not going to relate necessarily to the emotional experience. That's what I think he means. I remember, I think, struggling with this as well when we learned it the first time. Why is he adding the second part about Das? But I believe that's the explanation.
I think you're right.
Because I don't know any other way that you can explain it. Why else would he bring it? Doesn't seem to fit here unless you say what I just said. So it's interesting. So Das is iskashrus. The thing that's bothering me is that Das iskashrus is like almost like the tirdas haseichel. You're investing in it. You're immersing yourself in it. No, that's Pashtus what he's saying. Okay, so that covers that parenthesis. Any questions?
Which means even though the nefesh is becoming one thing with the goof, but still it has to be part of the nefesh that is connecting itself to the goof. It's not, doesn't mean that the nefesh is losing itself.
Well, it's like, people marveled when the Rebbe Fabring sometimes 5, 6, 7 hours and never left the seat, even though he was drinking and he was Fabringen. When you get to a place where you are so elevated to a more ruchnistic place, the physical body almost like doesn't disappear, but it becomes a non-distraction. There are many examples for this. For example, I told someone the other day, if you are in the throes of a tremendous taiva, your nefesh habamis has gotten you to really desire something very powerfully, very passionate about it. And we all know when emotions get stimulated on that level, it's almost impossible to stop it because it's not rational. You become obsessed, completely consumed. But at that moment, someone tells you that, God forbid, someone you love is going to an emergency room. God forbid, an emergency. What do you think will happen? Suddenly, that entire passion will disappear because something has taken over that's more important to you. And it's life and death. What happened to the passion? Why is the nefesh habamis not affecting you at that moment? Because you found something that is much more powerful. So in other words, even though on a natural routine day, we all have different emotional reactions to things, and the body has different pain or pleasure, like we're learning here, but there is that nefesh, even though the nefesh manifests within the blood and in that part of a person and so on, and generally would feel pain and pleasure, physical pain and pleasure, but you could see that a person, if they lift themselves up to a certain level, suddenly the physical experiences around them can become dulled or almost non-existent. They tell the story where the Alter Rebbe was given a meal, and unfortunately they put all the salt in the meal, and he ate it like nothing. Now, the question is, did he feel the salt, or did he bring himself to a point where he didn't even taste it, so it wasn't even unpleasant to him? The point is that a person who reaches a certain state of transcendence can literally suspend themselves from their senses, from their sensory experiences, whether it's taste, touch, sight, sound, and smell. And there are many examples for it, but he's bringing here a very physical example. The tir de sasechel is a very good example. I remember the Rebbe saying the Rebbe said, for example, a number of times, I remember, that when a person learns Torah, you should be so immersed in learning, you shouldn't even hear the phone ring. Now, is that possible? I've seen it possible. You don't have to be a Rebbe. You don't even have to be a Beinani for that. If a person's really engaged in something, sometimes you won't hear the phone ring, you won't hear other things as well. Why? Your ears are working, your eyes are working, because you're so immersed. You've like elevated yourself to this, what he calls the level, what he calls here, etzem aruchin shel nefesh, not the way the nefesh is mislabish ba'adam. So this very same soul that you have, it depends what you're accessing. Now again, in a routine life, day to day, the daily grind of our lives, it's usually not that way. Now, this is clearly going to be necessary in understanding the bigger picture here. We still have to see where all this is headed. Because meanwhile, what he's been discussing here is his bonus of Ani Hashem Leishanisi. Now he's coming to the place where you can reach a place of so-called Leishanisi, even when you're talking about a nefesh that manifests in a body that does have a shinui due to the mikre haguf, due to the experiences of the body. But I don't want to jump ahead of ourselves. We shouldn't jump ahead of ourselves. We'll see how he develops this. But this is what we're in the middle of right now, understanding of the experience. So there's the experience where the nefesh and guf definitely impact each other, like he said, both ways, both directions, whether it's pain or pleasure. And there's a level that's beyond that.
The Shlomo Kalina was sitting with Alter Rebbe then. It could be that everyone was overwhelmed, so everyone that was cooking was adding salt, thinking that maybe the other one didn't, and he couldn't eat it. But the Alter Rebbe ate it. So he asked him, how are you eating it? And he said that since I think he came to the Maggid, he was praying himself that he does not feel the taste. So you gave the explanation.
Yeah, exactly. And you can see there are many examples of this where you know, and we're not talking about supernatural powers. You see, people are really, really immersed, and so on. And that certain things they just don't. They may not even hear something or see something that just completely in a different place.
I'm wondering if
Okay.
these different levels of occupation of the soul interacting with the goof and physical sensations around surrounding it, if it has anything to do with Naran, and the Rebbe doesn't talk about like Nefesh Ruach Neshama. The Rebbe doesn't talk about that at all here. So obviously, the 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 most obvious answer is no, it has nothing to do with that, because or else he would have said it. But I'm wondering, like one sometimes thinks of the neshama as something that's I don't know, more elevated, somewhat detached from the goof. I mean, it's part of the goof, but it's not like connected, like we're saying. Whereas nefesh and ruach, you it seems
But
like
since the
one.
Rebbe Rashab doesn't say it like you say it, you know, and he's familiar with the concept of Nefesh Ruach Neshama,
Uh,
to me, I don't see why we need to bring that in unless
mm.
it answers a question that you may have. I mean, just to connect.
I guess then my question to you is, how do you juxtapose this particular here in the Ayin Beis discussion of the levels of attachment or detachment of the soul, where he uses the term nefesh in the general sense, as related against this other scheme of understanding the soul? How would you relate the two? Or are they each can't talk about the two concepts in the same?
Why is it relevant here? I mean, he's speaking very simply. There's the nefesh that manifests inside of a body through blood, hadam hu nefesh. The blood is called the ruchni shebegashmi. The nefesh is called the gashmi shebegashmi that manifests. And then there's a level of the soul that is somewhat removed from that, what he calls the
Right.
etzem nefesh and so on. I mean, that's what's
I
missing.
understand, but
What's
it
missing?
sounds there's nothing missing, but the part that engages with the body that is mispal sounds a lot like in the scheme of Naran sounds like nefesh, and the part that doesn't necessarily engage.
Why not ruach? I mean, why based on what are you saying that?
Will you tell me what's the difference between nefesh and neshama? I forget about ruach.
It's not discussion here. It's completely not relevant here. Nefesh and neshama. Nefesh could be nihi, and neshama is chabad, and ruach is midas. That's nefesh, ruach, neshama.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There's many ways to explain it.
Okay. It's just a question of curiosity. I'm not coming to challenge the Rebbe.
No, fine. I'm just saying.
You.
Like I said, to bring other things in, unless they come to add something or it's to answer a question, can sometimes just confuse because everybody understands nefesh, ruach, neshama in different ways. There's different ways to explain it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. I mean.
Thank you.
Yeah. He may even use it later. I don't know. I don't recall if he brings in that language, but we'll see. Okay, we'll stop here. The next is another parenthesis that goes all the way till the end of the paragraph. And then he's going to go back to how it is l'mayla by Hashem and Elokus. Okay. So now you know a little of what the Rebbe Rashab probably was thinking about when he said Shema. All this is part of his bonus.
The Rebbe Rashab said one time, Yedati v'yisiv.
That's another thing, yeah. That's correct. I see later in the parentheses, he does bring Naran Sheb and Neshama. I don't know if it's relevant to this, but we'll see.
Where is that? The bottom of 1469?
The end, 7 lines from the end of the paragraph.
Thank you.
So maybe there is some
connection.
Again, like we'll take it step by step. When we get there, we'll see how that fits in.
Okay.
Okay, we'll stop here. Stopping here by the end of the parentheses around 10 lines, 3, 6.